Some parts of history feel like nightmares. Others feel like warnings. But then there are the parts that feel like they were never meant to be found at all. Stories buried so deep, so deliberately, so violently, that only whispers remain. Tonight, boss, we uncover one of those whispers. Long before the world knew the cruelty of medieval Europe, and long before the Roman Empire's brutality turned into legend, there existed a different kind of horror. A darker one. A more intelligent one. A punishment system not designed just to hurt the body, but to shatter the mind. These were the Byzantine arena punishments. Rituals of fear crafted not by soldiers or emperors, but by men who understood the human mind better than anyone of their time. And boss, what made these punishments terrifying wasn't what they did to people's bodies. It was what they did to their identity. But before we tear open the shadows of Constantinople, if you're new here, subscribe to the History Veil. Because the stories we reveal aren't found in school books. They are hidden in forgotten manuscripts, political secrets, and banned chronicles. Like the video, share it with someone who loves dark history. And step with me into the arena where even Romans trembled. The truth begins here. For the Byzantines, the arena wasn't just a place of spectacle. It wasn't merely a place for crowds to cheer. It was a theater of psychological warfare. A laboratory for fear. A stage upon which human pride was dismantled piece by piece. And unlike the Romans, whose punishments were brutal, straightforward, and openly violent, the Byzantines preferred to break a person slowly, silently, intelligently, ritually. The crowds came not just to witness pain, but to witness transformation. Because every punishment was symbolic. A lesson, a warning, a political message disguised as entertainment. Imagine walking into a massive stone arena. Its walls echoing with thousands of footsteps. Not screams. Not cheers. Just footsteps. Because the fear was so thick in the air that the audience didn't dare make sound. This was not a place of chaos. This was a place of choreography. The first thing a condemned person felt was not pain, but being watched. Tens of thousands of cold, silent eyes. Studying your face. Your walk. Your breath. Your fear. The Byzantines believed the mind broke long before the body ever did. So their punishments always began long before the spectacle itself. First, the condemned were stripped of identity. Not violently. Not forcefully. But symbolically. Their clothes replaced with plain garments. Their hair cut in specific patterns. That marked shame, not guilt. Their names were removed from official records. Before anything physical ever touched them. To lose your name in Byzantium was to lose your future, your story, your existence. By the time a prisoner stepped into the arena, they were already half broken. Not because of chains, but because of invisibility. And boss, this is where Byzantine punishments became something even darker than Roman brutality. The punishments were performances. Every act inside the arena was staged to humiliate, undermine, and dismantle the prisoner's sense of self. Sometimes the condemned were placed in elaborate symbolic scenes, where they were forced to reenact moral lessons, meant to turn their crimes into cautionary tales. Not with violence, but with spectacle. And the crowd watched. Not because they enjoyed pain, but because they enjoyed fear. Fear of becoming the next one forced into this silent theater of ruin. But boss, the real terror wasn't the arena. It was what happened before the arena. Because the most psychologically destructive Byzantine punishments didn't involve blades, beasts, or torture racks. They involved identity, memory, and humiliation designed so precisely that even hardened Roman soldiers found them disturbing. One chronicler wrote, "The arena did not devour the body. It devoured the spirit." And the first punishment we are about to explore, the one the Byzantines used on traitors, spies, scholars, prisoners of war, and sometimes even their own politicians, was so psychologically devastating that emperors used it only when they wanted a message carved into the minds of everyone watching. Boss, this is where the nightmare truly begins. Part 2 will reveal the first of these punishments, a method so chilling that Byzantine scribes recorded it in metaphors and riddles, instead of describing it directly, because even they feared writing the truth plainly. The Byzantines believed something chilling. That a human being could be destroyed without ever being touched. And nowhere was that belief clearer than in their first great arena punishment. A ritual designed not to harm the body, but to tear open the mind. The moment the prisoner stepped into the arena, thousands of eyes locked onto him like blades. But there was no noise. No cheering. No anger. Only silence. A silence so sharp it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. Because this punishment wasn't meant to entertain. It was meant to transform. Before the physical spectacle even began, Byzantine officials carried out what they called the unveiling. The prisoner was led to the center of the arena, placed on a raised stone platform, and forced to stand completely still, while heralds read a list of things that had been taken away. Your name is gone. Your rank is gone. Your status is gone. Your place in this world is gone. They didn't shout these words. They whispered them, a whisper amplified by the perfect acoustics of the arena, so that the prisoner heard his own erasure echoing back at him. And boss, this whisper broke more men than any blade ever could. Because before the Byzantines punished the body, they punished identity. Once the herald finished, the next stage began. A ritual so psychologically devastating that even foreign envoys took notes to warn their own rulers. The pageant of shame. Unlike the Romans, who believed in blood and spectacle, the Byzantines believed in theater. The crowd didn't come to see suffering. They came to see humiliation crafted like art. The condemned would be dressed in an outfit that symbolized their crime, but in a twisted, mocking way. A corrupt official might be forced to wear oversized scrolls. A traitor might be given a robe in torn imperial colors. A scholar accused of blasphemy might be made to carry blank books. It wasn't violent, but it was brutal. Because the Byzantines understood something deep. Public humiliation rewires the human mind faster than pain ever could. As the prisoner walked around the arena in this symbolic costume, the audience remained utterly silent. A silence that crushed the soul far more than laughter ever would. Silence meant judgment. Silence meant abandonment. Silence meant you were no longer worth reacting to. One Byzantine chronicler wrote, "It was like watching a man walk through his own funeral, while still alive." But boss, this was just the beginning. The next stage of the punishment was the most feared. The mirror walk. At specific points around the arena, officials placed polished bronze mirrors, not to show beauty, but to show distortion. These mirrors were curved, bent, warped, crafted specifically to twist and stretch a prisoner's reflection into inhuman shapes. Each time the condemned passed one, they were forced to look into it. Imagine seeing yourself in front of tens of thousands of people as something less than human, something broken, something monstrous. That was the Byzantine intention. They didn't want you to fear blades. They wanted you to fear your own reflection. The crowd watched in silence as prisoners began to visibly lose composure, stumbling, trembling, looking away, covering their faces. And boss, some simply stopped walking altogether, as if the distorted reflection had ripped the last piece of identity from their body. This ritual, this slow psychological unraveling, was so effective that foreign ambassadors wrote letters home, warning, the Byzantines break men with mirrors, not chains. After the mirror walk ended, the torment reached its final stage, the circle of accusation. 12 officials surrounded the prisoner in a perfect ring. Each one spoke a different criticism, not screamed, not shouted, but recited in calm, controlled voices. You abandoned your duty. You betrayed your people. You disgraced your name. You dishonored the empire. You failed. You are unworthy. It continued until all 12 voices blended into a suffocating wall of accusation. This wasn't violence. This was psychological architecture. The Byzantines believed that if you make a man hear enough accusations, he begins to accuse himself. He becomes his own executioner. When it was over, the crowd still didn't cheer. They simply watched as the prisoner, now mentally destroyed, was escorted out of the arena. Some fainted. Some lost their voices. Some forgot their own names. One historian described the punishment like this. The man died inside himself, and the body merely walked away. Boss, this is only the first Byzantine punishment. In part 3, we explore a method so psychologically disturbing that even Roman envoys wrote, "This is cruelty wrapped in intelligence." The arena emptied slowly, but the fear it created stayed behind. Stone doesn't forget. The walls of Constantinople didn't forget. And neither did the prisoners who stepped back into their cells, after being paraded as shadows of their former selves. But if you think the pageant of shame was the worst the Byzantines could do, boss, you're not ready for what came next. Because the next punishment wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about identity extraction. Tearing the self out of a human being. Without laying a hand on them. The Byzantines called it, the unmaking. And even Roman diplomats wrote that. To witness it once is to fear your own reflection forever. It began in a room far smaller than the arena. But infinitely more terrifying. A long, narrow stone chamber. With tall windows placed high above eye level. So that sunlight entered only in thin, cold ribbons. Not enough to warm the room. Just enough to show the dust floating in the air. Like drifting ghosts. This was where the condemned were taken. After the arena spectacle broke their outer pride. Now came the part meant to break the inner world. Inside the chamber, Byzantine officials surrounded the prisoner. Not with weapons, but with symbols. Scrolls, seals, masks, crests, tablets, and wax stamps. Objects with meaning. Objects tied to identity, authority, and memory. But these objects weren't used to honor the condemned. They were used to rewrite him. The prisoner was seated on a plain wooden stool. The cold stone floor beneath his feet. Designed to amplify the sense of emptiness. 2 guards stood behind. Not touching him. Only watching. Watching was enough. And then, the questioning began. But boss, this was no Roman interrogation. No shouted accusations. No threats of pain. No instruments. The Byzantines broke a man. Through contradiction. And confusion. Officials asked questions in calm, soft voices. Voices so gentle they felt unnatural. What was your rank? What was your duty? Who did you serve? What oath did you break? What truth do you deny? Why does your name no longer belong to you? Who are you now? But the worst part was not the questions. It was that every official asked a different version of the same question. Each one contradicting the last. A prisoner could not answer. Because every answer was wrong. The moment it left his tongue. The Byzantines believed that. If you tear a man's certainty apart, everything else collapses naturally. Historians later called this technique logic torture. Not because it hurt the body, but because it shattered the foundation, upon which the mind stands. And boss, men who survived Roman whips, crumbled under Byzantine contradictions. After hours of this mental erosion, the next phase began. One official stepped forward, carrying a polished bronze mask, with empty eye holes, and smooth, emotionless contours. It wasn't meant to frighten. It was meant to replace. The prisoner was ordered to look at it. Not wear it. Not be struck with it. Just look. Because the Byzantines believed that staring at a face without identity erodes your own. To the broken mind, reflection means truth. But this mask reflected nothing. No emotion. No history. No humanity. And when a man compares his face to a face that means nothing, he begins to accept that he himself means nothing. One chronicler wrote, I saw strong men weep at the sight of that mask. Not from fear of pain, but fear of becoming empty. But boss, this punishment still wasn't complete. The final phase of the unmaking was the one that even hardened Byzantine guards hated performing. The name burial. A scribe entered the room, carrying a fresh sheet of parchment, and a small clay pot filled with dark ink. He would speak the prisoner's name aloud. One final time. Not to honor him. Not to record him. But to bury him. The name was written slowly, symbolically, with painful precision. The prisoner was forced to watch, as each letter appeared on the parchment. And then, in front of him, the scribe dipped a cloth in ink, and wiped the name away, stroke by stroke, until nothing remained but a smear. The meaning was unmistakable. You once existed. Now you do not. Boss. Some men collapsed at that moment. Some screamed. Some fell into complete silence. Some forgot their own language. Some forgot themselves entirely. And the Byzantines preferred those outcomes. Because a man without identity is a man who cannot rebel, cannot lead, cannot even think outside the walls they built around him. This was the unmaking. A punishment so psychologically devastating that even generals whispered, better to be beaten by Rome than unmade by Byzantium. But boss, the next punishment, the one in part 4, was even darker. A punishment designed not to erase identity, but to replace it with something else. A method that left prisoners alive, but no longer themselves. The kind of punishment that made even emperors uneasy. The Byzantines believed a terrifying truth. Breaking a man was easy. Replacing him was genius. And that's what made their next punishment so horrifying. Where the Romans shattered bones, the Byzantines shattered purpose. Where Romans punished rebellion, the Byzantines punished identity. Where Romans feared chaos, the Byzantines feared free will. The punishment was simple in appearance, but devastating in effect. They called it the replacement. It began in a chamber far more ornate than the unmaking room. Columns carved with saints and emperors. Golden mosaics. Soft red drapery. Flickering oil lamps casting warm light across the stone floor. But boss, this beauty was a trap. A psychological snare designed to confuse the mind. Just enough to make it weaker. Because after being stripped of identity, after being cracked psychologically, after hearing accusations echo inside their skull, the prisoner was suddenly placed in a room that looked like it belonged to a nobleman. It was the Byzantines' way of saying, you no longer know your place. 4 officials entered. Not warriors. Not guards. Not executioners. They were scholars. Psychologists before the word even existed. Men who understood the mind better than any physician of their time. They stood around the prisoner. Not to judge him, but to reshape him. The first official stepped forward carrying a folded piece of fine cloth. Not a robe. Not armor. But a simple sash embroidered with symbols. He placed it gently on the prisoner's shoulders. To any normal person, it looked harmless. But to the Byzantines, it was the beginning of a transformation. A symbol of assigned identity. An identity chosen by the empire, not by the condemned. The prisoner was no longer himself. He was being rewritten. The second official placed a small wax seal in his hand. A seal that traditionally belonged to low-ranking assistants in the imperial bureaucracy. A meaningless role. But a role nonetheless. The Byzantines knew something powerful. A man without identity is broken. A man given a false identity is controlled. The prisoner looked at the seal. Confused. Trembling. Unable to understand why he was being given a tool of office. After being told he no longer existed. That confusion was the punishment. The third official stepped forward, holding a short script. A list of phrases the prisoner was told to memorize. Not prayers. Not declarations of guilt. But instructions. Cold, emotionless, mechanical instructions. Stand when summoned. Speak only when asked. Record what you see. Forget what you remember. Remember what you are told. This was not retraining. This was mental replacement. The Byzantines believed that if you force a man to repeat instructions that contradict his inner world, eventually the mind tries to reconcile the contradiction by accepting the new identity as truth. Boss. This was psychological engineering centuries ahead of its time. But the fourth official, he was the most feared. He carried a polished bronze medallion with an abstract symbol carved into it. A symbol with no meaning, no history, no story. And that was the point. He held the medallion inches from the prisoner's face and said the words every Byzantine feared becoming. This is what you are now. Not a name, not a title, not even a role. Just a symbol. Something that exists, but has no meaning on its own. The prisoner was then instructed to recite a chilling line. I am what the empire needs. Those 6 words erased whatever was left of him. Some men repeated the line with trembling voices. Some stared blankly, as if waiting for reality to rearrange itself. Some tried to resist. But resistance only made the ritual longer, more disorienting, and more devastating. Because the Byzantines didn't punish resistance. They absorbed it. They rewrote it. They transformed it into obedience. Piece by piece. Thought by thought. Until nothing inside the prisoner belonged to him anymore. Many who endured the replacement emerged behaving like low-level servants, assigned to random imperial tasks, but with no memory of who they used to be. They weren't formally enslaved. They weren't executed. They weren't abused. They were repurposed. Living tools. Walking warnings. Proof that the empire could turn anyone into anything. A Roman observer famously wrote, "These men walk, speak, and breathe, but their souls belong elsewhere." Even emperors grew uneasy around those who underwent the replacement. They moved differently, spoke differently, looked past people rather than at them, as if constantly listening to some silent command. that outsiders could not hear. This punishment didn't just erase identity. It replaced it with a false one, designed to keep the condemned alive, but empty. A man spared from death, but not spared from himself. Boss. The final punishment, the climax of the Byzantine arena system, is darker than humiliation, darker than unmaking, darker than replacement. A punishment where the condemned didn't lose their identity, they lost their reality. And Part 5 reveals that nightmare. By the time a prisoner survived humiliation, survived unmaking, survived replacement, there was almost nothing left inside them. Almost. And the Byzantines feared that almost. Because a man who loses identity can still rebuild it. A man who becomes a servant can still think quietly. A man who forgets his past might someday remember. So the empire crafted one final punishment. The one they used only when they wanted to erase not the person, but the person's reality. They called it the veil of illusion. And boss. This was the punishment that even Byzantine scholars recorded in metaphors, afraid that writing it plainly might give it power. It began in a place unlike any chamber before. Not cold, not dark, not intimidating. Instead, the prisoner was taken into a hall, lined with polished marble, so bright that it felt unreal. The sound of their footsteps echoed endlessly, as if the walls were farther away than they truly were. This was deliberate. The Byzantines understood something that only modern psychology would rediscover centuries later. A confused mind accepts new realities faster. Inside the hall, there were no guards, no chains, no officials standing in judgment. Just 3 figures dressed in white robes, with gold embroidery along the sleeves. Their faces were calm, almost too calm, like portraits come to life. They did not speak at first. They merely watched the prisoner, until the silence itself became unbearable. Then the first figure stepped forward, holding a small, circular mirror. Unlike the warped bronze mirrors of the arena, this one showed a perfect reflection. Too perfect. The prisoner was told to stare into it, until they could recognize something. Anything. About themselves. But boss. By this stage, most prisoners couldn't. The unmaking had dissolved their identity. The replacement had overwritten their purpose. Now they stared at their own face, and saw a stranger. That was phase 1. Phase 2 began when the second figure presented a scroll. Not a list of crimes. Not accusations. But a fabricated biography. A new origin story. Not one of power. Not one of heroism. But a life so dull, so painfully ordinary, that it felt like an insult. The scroll described a childhood they never lived, a village they never saw, a trade they never learned. It replaced their parents, their memories, their failures, their victories. It replaced everything. The prisoner was forced to read it. And if they hesitated, the figure corrected them gently, as if teaching a child to read for the first time. The Byzantines understood that if you make a man repeat a lie long enough, he will eventually believe the lie, just to escape the conflict inside his mind. Phase 3 was the most unsettling. The third robed figure placed a hand on the prisoner's shoulder and guided them toward a curtained archway. Behind the curtain was a room filled with actors, men and women hired by the empire to play the roles. From the scroll's fabricated biography, a mother, a brother, a childhood friend, a merchant master, all dressed in simple clothing, all speaking in soft, welcoming voices, and each of them addressed the prisoner, as if they truly knew him. Welcome home. We've been waiting for you. You look tired from your journey. You remember us, don't you? Boss. This wasn't punishment. This was psychological erasure by immersion. A man whose identity is gone, and whose purpose is overwritten, can be guided into believing he lived a life he never lived. Some prisoners resisted. Some screamed. Some shook their heads violently, trying to cling to whatever pieces of memory survived. But the Byzantines were patient. The actors calmly repeated their lines, day after day, week after week, until the prisoner broke, until they accepted the people in that room as their true family, until they responded to the new name given to them, until the empire decided the transformation was complete. Once the prisoner accepted the new reality, they were released back into society, not as criminals, not as servants, not as broken men, but as fabricated citizens, with fabricated memories, and fabricated loyalties, walking among normal people, with no idea that they once stood in the arena of judgment. Roman envoys wrote in horror. They erase not the body, not the soul, but the life itself. What remains is a breathing phantom, who believes the empires lie more deeply than truth. And boss, this final punishment, the veil of illusion, is why Byzantium's control lasted so long. Not through armies, not through violence, not through terror, but through the quietest weapon humanity ever created. A rewritten reality. The prisoner didn't just lose his past. He gained a new one. One he never questioned. Because questioning required a mind he no longer had.